I opened the bedroom door, and in that single heartbeat, 30 years of marriage burned to ashes. I can still hear the soft click of that doorknob. It wasn't supposed to sound like betrayal. It was supposed to sound like home. My home. The one I had built, brick by brick, memory by memory, for 3 decades. But that night, everything changed. It was past midnight. The house was wrapped in silence, except for the hum of the old ceiling fan and the faint whisper of the ocean outside our California window. My son Ethan and his wife Mia had moved in with us temporarily while saving for a new house. I had been overjoyed. A full house again, like old times. I had spent the day cooking their favorite meals, laughing at their plans, thinking how lucky I was to have a family that stayed close. But that night, something tugged at me, a strange stillness, a whisper in my gut that said, check. I don't know what pushed me to leave my bed. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe the kind of pain only women sense before they see it with their eyes. I slipped on my robe and walked through the dim hallway. The light under the guest room door was on, Ethan and Mia's room, but their door was closed. My husband Robert was supposed to be asleep next to me, but his side of the bed was empty. My heart sank. I remember whispering, "No, please no," under my breath as I stepped closer to that faint golden light. The carpet felt like sandpaper beneath my feet. My pulse echoed in my ears. Every step was heavier than the last. When I turned the knob, I didn't expect to find hell behind it. There they were, entwined, startled like thieves caught mid-act. My husband, my daughter-in-law, the man I had loved for 30 years, the father of my only child, the man who once kissed my tears away, with a young woman who called me Mum. My body froze before my voice did. Robert? The word cracked like glass. They scrambled, sheets flying, shame covering their faces too late. I wanted to scream, but my throat betrayed me. Tears didn't fall right away. They just waited, like soldiers on the edge of surrender. Mia stuttered, "It's not what it looks like," and I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but the kind that bursts from heartbreak, a jagged, broken sound. "Not what it looks like?" I whispered. "Then tell me, Mia, what does this look like? A family reunion?" Robert sat there, silent, cowardly. His eyes begged for mercy he didn't deserve. For the first time in 30 years, I saw him not as my husband, but as a stranger wearing his face. I remember gripping the doorframe so tightly my fingers hurt. Every muscle wanted to collapse, but my pride kept me upright. I turned to Mia, her tears streaming, her voice trembling. "You had a son to raise, a home to build. You could have had everything. Why this?" Her answer was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to," I cut her off. "Oh, you meant every moment of it. You meant every lie, every smile at dinner, every fake thank you when I folded your laundry." Then I looked at Robert, and my voice steadied, not from calm, but from rage tempered by years of silence. 30 years, Robert. 30 years I gave you my youth, my body, my loyalty. I stood by you through debts, through your failures, through your drinking. I prayed for you when you didn't even pray for yourself. "And this is how you repay me?" He tried to speak, but words died in his throat. Good, because I was done listening. I left the room. My hands shook so violently, I had to grip the wall just to walk straight. In the kitchen, the smell of lavender candles still lingered from dinner. I had lit them for peace. Now that scent mocked me. I remember looking around, the photos on the fridge, the anniversary cards, the family portraits, and realizing they were all lies. My life had been a play, and I was the only one who didn't know it. When I heard footsteps behind me, I turned. It was Robert. He looked pale, defeated, still half-dressed in guilt. "Please, Grace, listen," he started. "Don't," I said. "If you speak, I might break something I can't fix." He took a hesitant step forward. "It was a mistake." "Mistake?" I cut him off again. "You don't trip and fall into someone's bed, Robert." Silence filled the room like smoke. And then something inside me changed. For years, I had been the gentle wife, the one who forgave, who endured, who stayed. But in that moment, I realized something powerful. Staying quiet had made me invisible. I straightened up. "Get out. Both of you. Tonight." "Grace," I said out. My voice shook the walls. He'd never seen me like that before. Neither had I. They left. The front door slammed. The house fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't peace. It was emptiness. And yet, deep beneath that emptiness, something flickered. Not anger, not despair, freedom. As I sat alone on the couch, the clock ticking past 2 a.m., I whispered to myself, "I may be broken tonight, but I won't stay broken." That was the night my old life died and my real one began. Sunlight came in through the curtains like nothing had happened. But I had changed. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was a woman betrayed. When I opened my eyes that morning, the world felt foreign. The walls were the same, the furniture untouched, but everything inside me had shifted. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the rumpled sheets that had known decades of shared dreams. It felt absurd that the same bed where I once whispered prayers beside Robert could now hold the ghost of last night's truth. I didn't sleep a minute. The silence of the house was deafening, the kind that presses against your ribs until breathing hurts. I could still hear their voices echoing in my head. "Grace, please listen. It was a mistake." Every syllable replayed like a cruel record. I got up and went to the kitchen. The coffee maker blinked, ready, as if mocking me. I poured a cup and sat at the table, my hands trembling so badly I spilled half of it. My reflection in the black coffee looked like a stranger, eyes swollen, face pale, lips dry. That was when the front door creaked. Robert. He had come back, or maybe he never left. He stood there, holding his car keys, his eyes red with guilt and sleeplessness. "Grace," he started. I didn't answer. I kept stirring my coffee, as if silence could erase him. He stepped closer. "Please, we need to talk." "Talk?" I finally looked up. "About what, Robert?" "About how you slept with our son's wife under my roof. Or about how you've destroyed everything that was left of this family." He winced like I'd hit him. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good," I cut him off. "Because forgiveness isn't on the table." He slumped into the chair across from me, his hands shaking. It was wrong. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't myself. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, don't you dare blame this on confusion. You were yourself, Robert. You were just the version of yourself I refused to see." End. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with regret and burnt coffee. Then he whispered, "Please, don't tell Ethan. It'll destroy him." That sentence broke something inside me. "Don't tell Ethan," I repeated slowly. "So you want to keep your secret intact while I drown in silence? You want me to carry your shame for you?" "Grace," I'm begging you. He'll never look at me the same way again. I slammed my hand on the table. He shouldn't. The cup fell, coffee splattering across the table like spilled truth. He deserves to know what kind of people he's living with. Robert stood up, tears brimming. It was a moment of weakness. 30 years, Robert. 30 years of marriage, and that's what you reduce it to, a moment. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Don't. You lost the right to touch me. I walked out of the kitchen, but he followed me into the living room. Grace, please, let me fix this. We can go to therapy. We can. I turned, voice trembling. You can't glue trust back together once it's shattered, Robert. It doesn't mend, it cuts. And I'm done bleeding for you. He stood there, broken, but I felt nothing. No pity, no warmth. Just exhaustion, a heavy, hollow kind that only betrayal can bring. That was the moment I realized something. I had spent my entire life being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caretaker, but I had forgotten to be me. When he finally left, I locked the door behind him. I leaned against it and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. Later that morning, I heard a car pull up. Ethan, my son. The only person I had left to lose. He walked in, cheerful, holding a bag of groceries. Hey, Mom, I brought breakfast. Thought we could all eat together. My chest tightened. He looked so much like his father. The same sharp jawline, the same dimple when he smiled. My throat closed up. Ethan, I whispered, we need to talk. His smile faded instantly. What's wrong? Did something happen? I couldn't tell him right away. My lips trembled as words fought their way out. It's about your father and Mia. He frowned. What about them? The silence stretched. He looked at me, then at the untouched dishes, the broken cup, the stain on the table. Mom, he said slowly. What happened? I broke. Tears I had held all night came rushing like a flood. I saw them, Ethan. Together. Last night. He blinked, confused. Together how? My voice cracked. The way no husband and daughter-in-law should ever be. He went pale. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then he whispered, You're not serious. I wish I wasn't. He dropped the grocery bag. Eggs shattered on the floor. His face twisted. Shock, anger, disbelief, all at once. Dad and Mia, my wife. I nodded silently. He staggered back, gripping the counter as if the world was spinning beneath him. Where are they? He demanded. Gone, I said quietly. I told them to leave. He stormed toward the door, but I caught his arm. Ethan, stop. Don't go after them. You'll only find pain. He looked at me, eyes red, voice shaking. How could he do this to you? To me? I had no answer. There was no logic in betrayal. We sat on the couch together, both broken in our own ways. For a long time, we said nothing, just stared at the family portraits that no longer meant anything. Then Ethan whispered, What are you going to do now? I looked out the window, at the sky, the trees, the world beyond the walls of my pain. I don't know, I said softly. But I think I need to find out who I am when I'm not somebody's wife. He nodded slowly, tears glistening. Do you want me to stay with you, Mum? I smiled faintly. No, sweetheart. You have your own life to rebuild. I'll be okay. But as I said it, I realized something incredible. For the first time in decades, I actually meant it. That morning didn't just end my marriage. It began my freedom. When they left, the silence didn't comfort me. It accused me. Every wall seemed to whisper. You stayed too long. The day after Ethan left, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by everything I once thought defined me. Framed photos, wedding china, the couch we bought after Robert's first promotion, the curtains I sewed myself. Everything had a story, and now every story hurt. For hours, I wandered from room to room, like a ghost haunting her own past. The scent of betrayal still lingered in the sheets, in the air, in the corners of my memory. I stripped the bed, opened all the windows, and watched the wind carry pieces of my old life out into the world. I sat down on the edge of the bed and whispered to myself, "You're free now." But freedom, I realized, can feel a lot like grief. For 30 years, I'd been Mrs. Grace Howard, wife, mother, homemaker, caretaker. My entire identity was woven into other people's needs. I knew how Robert liked his coffee. I knew Ethan's favorite childhood bedtime story by heart, but I didn't know my own favorite song anymore. I didn't know what I liked to do when no one needed me. That realization hit harder than the betrayal itself. By afternoon, I had made my decision. I couldn't stay here. Not in this house that had turned into a mausoleum of memories. I called a real estate agent. My voice shook, but I kept it steady enough to say the words, "I'm selling the house." The woman on the other end asked, "Are you sure, ma'am? That's a big decision." "Yes," I said. "It's time to let go." After hanging up, I sat down with a notebook and started making lists. Things to keep, things to sell, things to forget. I found old love letters from Robert in a drawer, yellowed, folded, once sacred. I read one. The ink faded, but the lies still sharp. "You're my forever, Grace. I'll never stop choosing you." I burned them in the fireplace. Watching the paper curl and turn to ash felt like a quiet kind of justice. That evening, I made myself dinner. Just one plate, one fork, one glass of wine. It felt strange at first. The table looked too big, the room too quiet. But somewhere between the first bite and the last sip, I realized I wasn't lonely. I was just unused to my own company. And that was okay. HRM. The next morning, I drove to the beach. I hadn't been there in years, not since Ethan was little. The ocean had always been my place of peace. Endless, unpredictable, honest. I stood barefoot in the sand, the wind pulling at my hair, and I thought about how life is like the tide. It takes away what you love, but it also brings you what you need. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was healing. I sat there for hours, watching waves crash and gulls dance over the water. My mind drifted to the years I'd wasted waiting for Robert to change. How many times had I chosen silence over self-respect? How many times had I put his comfort above my peace? Too many to count. A little girl ran past me, laughing as she chased the foam. Her grandmother called out from behind her, "Stay close, sweetie." Something inside me softened. I used to be that grandmother, patient, loving, full of warmth. Somewhere under the rubble of betrayal, that woman still existed. I just had to find her again. That night, I started packing boxes. I played music while I worked. Old songs from my youth, ones I hadn't listened to in decades. The kind that made me want to dance barefoot in the kitchen. I hummed along softly, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. Every box I sealed felt like a promise to myself. A promise that I would not shrink into bitterness. A promise that I would not let their betrayal define me. When exhaustion finally caught up with me, I sank onto the couch. For the first time, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the life I was about to build. A life with no husband to please, no in-laws to endure, no expectations to suffocate under. Just me. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment near the coast. It wasn't fancy, peeling paint, creaky floors, and a balcony that overlooked the sea. But when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I unpacked slowly. Only the things that truly mattered came with me. A few photos of Ethan, my mother's old rosary, my favorite tea set. Everything else was gone, left behind with the woman I used to be. The first night there, I brewed chamomile tea and sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. The air was cool and quiet. I whispered to the stars, "You did it, Grace. You made it out." A tear slipped down my cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from relief. The days that followed were strange, but liberating. I started walking every morning, volunteering at a local bookstore, even joining a painting class. It was awkward at first, being surrounded by people who didn't know my story. But it was refreshing too. No one looked at me with pity. No one saw me as the woman whose husband cheated. They just saw Grace, a quiet, kind lady who loved the ocean and always smiled at strangers. And that was enough for now. Still, at night, the memories sometimes crept back. I would see Robert's face in my dreams, Mia's voice whispering apologies I never wanted to hear. But when that happened, I'd take a deep breath and remind myself, "You survived." And every morning, the sunlight would spill into my new home, washing the shadows away. People think strength is loud, like shouting or fighting back. But sometimes, strength is the quiet decision to walk away and never look back. That's what I was learning. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. And though I didn't know what the future held, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again live a life that made me feel small. At first, I thought survival meant just breathing. But one morning I realized survival meant living again. The days began to settle into rhythm, soft, quiet, and strangely beautiful. Mornings by the ocean, afternoons at the bookstore. Evenings painting sunflowers that never looked quite right but always made me smile. For years, I had lived by routines designed for others. Cooking at 6, cleaning by 9, waiting by the window until Robert came home from work. Now, I was learning to build routines just for me. Small rituals of self-respect. The first time I bought myself flowers, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because it felt revolutionary to do something kind for myself, without waiting for someone else to think I deserved it. The bookstore I volunteered at was small, tucked between a bakery and a thrift shop. The owner, Helen, was a woman in her late 60s, with wild grey curls and a laugh that could fill the room. She never pried, never asked why I'd suddenly shown up one day, offering to shelve books. She just smiled and said, "We could use more good souls here." Over time, Helen became more than my employer. She became my friend. She had that rare gift of sensing pain without needing the story behind it. Sometimes she'd slide a cup of coffee toward me and say, "You look like you need a story with a happy ending today." And sometimes she'd be right. One afternoon, as I was organizing the fiction shelf, Helen said, "You know, Grace, I've been thinking. You should help me run the shop, part-time. You're wonderful with people." I blinked. "Me? I'm not sure I'm qualified." She laughed. "Qualified? Honey, you survived marriage and motherhood. You can handle anything." Her words hit me deeper than she knew. For so long I had seen myself as broken. But maybe, just maybe, I was becoming whole in a new way. So I said yes. And for the first time in decades, I had a job. Every morning, I walked to the store with the sunrise at my back, the sea breeze on my face, and a sense of quiet pride in my heart. The customers, mostly locals, came to know me by name. They'd ask for recommendations, and I'd light up talking about the stories that had carried me through my darkest nights. One day, a young woman came in, tear-streaked, holding a book called How to Mend a Broken Heart. She couldn't have been more than 30. She whispered, "Does it really work?" I smiled softly. No book can mend your heart, but sometimes it reminds you that you still have one. She smiled weakly and left with a small stack of novels. And when she walked away, I felt something new inside me. Purpose. Maybe pain wasn't just meant to be endured. Maybe it was meant to be shared, to help someone else survive theirs. As months passed, Ethan visited occasionally. He had filed for divorce from Mia and was slowly rebuilding his life. At first, our conversations were cautious, fragile, like thin glass. But each time he came, we healed a little more together. One evening, he stood on my balcony, looking out at the sea. "You seem different, Mum, lighter." I smiled. "That's because I stopped waiting for someone else to carry my happiness." He nodded, eyes soft. "I'm proud of you." Those words, "I'm proud of you," were ones I hadn't heard in years. They filled the space Robert had once occupied in my soul, and somehow, it felt even better coming from my son. Sometimes, when the bookstore closed early, Helen and I would walk along the shore. She'd tell me stories of her own heartbreak, her late husband, her lost dreams, the time she started over at 50. "You remind me of me," she said once. I laughed. "That's either very good or very bad news." She winked. "Oh, it's the best kind. Women like us, we don't stay broken. We rebuild differently." Those walks became my therapy. Every wave that hit the shore felt like forgiveness. Not for Robert or Mia, but for myself, for staying too long, for silencing my own voice. I began to write again too, something I hadn't done since college. Short essays, diary entries, letters I never sent. Words poured out of me like water breaking a dam. I wrote about betrayal, about survival, about what it means to start over when your life burns down. One evening, Helen found me scribbling in the back room and said, "You should publish that someday." I laughed it off, but her words stuck. Maybe I could. Maybe my story could mean something. Then, one quiet Sunday morning, I saw Robert again. I was at the grocery store, picking out apples, when I heard a voice behind me say softly, "Grace." My hands froze around the fruit. I turned, and there he was, older, thinner, eyes full of regret. "Hello, Robert," I said, my tone calm but distant. He swallowed hard. "You look good." "I am," I replied simply. He hesitated. "I've wanted to see you for months, to say I'm sorry properly." I sighed. "Robert, you've said enough by doing what you did. I don't need your words to validate my pain." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I ruined everything. I know I did. Mia left me too, you know. She couldn't handle it." I said nothing. He continued, "I think about you every day, about what I destroyed. I wanted to know if you could ever forgive me." For a moment, I looked at him, the man I had once built my entire world around. And then, I realized I no longer felt hatred, or even love. Just peace. "Forgiveness," I said gently, "isn't about letting you back in. It's about letting myself move on. So yes, Robert, I forgive you, but I don't want you in my life again." He nodded, tears falling freely now. You're stronger than I ever deserved. I know, I said softly, and walked away. As I left the store, the air felt lighter, the world quieter. Forgiveness hadn't been for him, it had been for me. Some people spend their lives searching for closure. The closure isn't something you find. It's something you decide. That night, I went home, lit a candle, and opened my notebook again. On the first page, I wrote, I am Grace Howard. Not a wife, not a victim, not a shadow. Just Grace, and that's enough. For the first time, those words felt true. When you've spent 30 years being quiet, your own voice sounds strange the first time you truly use it. Months turned into a year. And life, for the first time, began to feel like mine. The bookstore had become more than a job. It was a sanctuary. I knew every creaky floorboard, every book that carried a story worth living for. And somehow, those stories began to merge with mine. Helen often said, Grace, you've got a storyteller's heart. At first, I brushed it off. I was too old to start new dreams, wasn't I? But deep down, something in me stirred every time she said it, like a sleeping bird testing its wings again. One evening, while cleaning the counter, I found a flyer pinned to the corkboard. Community writing contest. Theme, a second chance. I smiled. Maybe it was fate mocking me. Or maybe it was fate inviting me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank page and a trembling heart. I began to write, not for an audience, not for revenge, but for release. I wrote about the night that shattered my soul, about how the walls of my home whispered betrayal, about the morning I realized the silence could be mine again, about how pain, when faced with courage, becomes transformation. I didn't name names, but I poured my truth into every line. When I finished, I titled it, The Woman Who Chose Herself, and as I wrote the last word, I realized something miraculous. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Weeks passed, and I almost forgot about the contest. Then, one afternoon, I got a call. A soft voice said, Mrs. Howard, congratulations, you've won first place. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Are you sure? I finally whispered, my heart pounding. Yes, the woman laughed. Your story moved everyone on the panel. Would you be willing to read it at our event next month? I hung up, stunned. Me, Grace Howard, the woman who once couldn't raise her voice in her own home, was now being asked to stand before strangers and share her truth. Helen hugged me when she found out. See, she said, you're not done yet, Grace. You're just getting started. The night of the event, I wore a simple navy dress. Nothing fancy, but it made me feel elegant, confident. The auditorium lights were warm, and the audience looked kind. Still, when I stood at the podium, my palms felt slick with fear. I took a deep breath and looked around. Faces blurred in the light. My heart raced. But then I remembered the woman I used to be, the one who whispered instead of spoke. I refused to be her anymore. I began to read. They say heartbreak kills you, but sometimes it does something far more dangerous. It wakes you up. As I read, the words flowed not from memory, but from freedom. People leaned forward, listening. Some nodded. Some wiped tears. And when I finished, there was a long silence, the kind that holds weight. Then came the applause. Loud, genuine, healing. I smiled through tears. For once, I wasn't crying out of pain. After the event, several women came up to me. One said, "Your story, it's mine too." I thought I was alone. Another hugged me and whispered, "You gave me courage to leave." That night, I went home glowing. I realized I hadn't just written my story. I had reclaimed it. The local newspaper published an article about the contest. Local grandmother wins award for powerful story on resilience and self-worth. The headline made me laugh. Grandmother. That's who I was again, but on my own terms this time. Not defined by someone else's betrayal, but by my strength. Messages started coming in through the bookstore's email. Women who read my story wanted to talk, to share their own. I spent hours replying, listening, encouraging, reminding them they weren't broken beyond repair. One woman wrote, "You made me realize I can survive this too. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth." That's when it hit me. My pain had become someone else's hope. Maybe that was the point all along. Then, one afternoon, Ethan called. He sounded happier than I'd heard him in years. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything you've taught me, about walking away from things that kill your peace. I wanted you to know, I met someone new. She's kind, honest, different." My heart swelled. "Oh, Ethan," I said, "I'm so happy for you." He paused. "And Mom, I read your story. It made me cry. You're incredible." Those words were everything. It wasn't just me who had healed, it was my son too. The chain of pain had finally broken. Or HR, you don't rebuild life by forgetting what happened. You rebuild it by learning who you are because of it. That truth became my compass. I started teaching a small writing workshop at the bookstore every Saturday, a space for women to share stories they'd never told aloud. We called it The Brave Pages. We laughed, cried, sometimes just sat together in silence. Healing doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needs company. Each session reminded me how powerful truth can be when spoken without shame. And each story I heard made me more certain that the night that broke me had, in its own cruel way, also set me free. One evening, after class, Helen and I sat on the balcony with tea. The sun dipped low, painting the ocean gold. She looked at me and said, "Grace, you ever think about writing a book?" I smiled softly. "Maybe someday." She grinned. "Someday always starts today." I laughed. "Maybe you're right." And I knew, deep down, she was. Because for the first time, the story of my life wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about becoming. I used to think losing my marriage was the end of my story. But it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the chapter where I finally met myself. That night, I sat at my desk, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote the first line of my next story. Sometimes, to find peace, you have to lose everything that wasn't meant for you. And I smiled, because I finally understood what it meant to live, not for love, not for duty, but for me. For years, silence felt like punishment. But now, it feels like peace, the kind that hums beneath your heartbeat and whispers, "You made it." It's been 2 years since the night my life split open. 2 years since I walked out of that house, carrying nothing but my name, my grief, and the strength I didn't know I had. The world has changed around me. Or maybe I've changed enough to finally see it clearly. The ocean outside my apartment glitters differently now. The waves used to sound like loneliness. Now they sound like rhythm, steady, alive, endless. I wake up early most mornings, brew coffee, and watch the sunrise from my balcony. The light spills over everything like forgiveness, and every time I see that first gold line on the horizon, I whisper, "Thank you." Not for what happened, but for what came after. One morning, as I flipped through my notebook, the one filled with scattered thoughts and half-written essays, I realized I'd written more pages than I ever expected. There were stories of heartbreak, hope, and rediscovery, snippets of memories that once hurt too much to revisit. Now they were lessons. I smiled. Maybe this is the book, I murmured. Not a grand one, just an honest one. That afternoon, I took my laptop and went to a little cafe near the bookstore. It had wooden tables, quiet jazz music, and a window seat that looked out on the ocean. My favorite spot. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. I titled the document, "The Silence That Spoke Back." I began writing about the quiet moments, the kind no one talks about. The evenings when you sit alone, wondering if anyone will ever understand your pain. The mornings when you realize you've stopped crying over someone who never deserved your tears. The laughter that returns unexpectedly, as if it had just been waiting for you to notice life again. Writing became meditation. Each word I typed was a breath, each paragraph a prayer. I no longer needed the story to be perfect. I just needed it to be true. Sometimes I'd look around the cafe and notice people glancing at me, maybe wondering why an older woman sat there smiling to herself while typing furiously. If only they knew. I wasn't just writing. I was healing on paper. One day, a familiar face appeared at the cafe door. Ethan. He looked older, calmer, the same gentle eyes, but with a depth I'd never seen before. He hugged me tightly. "Mum," he said softly, "I came to see you and to say something I should have said years ago." I set down my cup. "You don't owe me anything, sweetheart." "I do," he insisted. "You showed me what real strength looks like. You lost everything and built yourself back, not with anger, but with grace. I'm proud of you." Tears welled up, but they weren't the heavy kind. They were light, the kind that cleanse rather than burn. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," I said, smiling. "You broke the cycle." We talked for hours about his life, his new home, his future. He said he wanted me to meet his fiancée one day. "She's wonderful, Mum. She reminds me a lot of you." When he left that evening, I sat in the fading light and realized something beautiful. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means simply wishing someone well and choosing peace anyway. A few months later, my book was finished. I didn't know if it was good or not. I just knew it was honest. I sent the manuscript to a small independent publisher a friend recommended, expecting nothing. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, I received an email. "Dear Mrs. Howard, your story touched us deeply. We would be honored to publish it." I stared at the screen, stunned. Then I laughed, loud, unrestrained laughter that echoed through my small apartment. I whispered, I did it. Not for fame, not for money, but because I had finally transformed pain into purpose. The book release was intimate. A local event at the bookstore where everything began. Helen stood beside me, beaming with pride. "Look at you, Grace," she said, squeezing my hand. "You turned your heartbreak into a handbook for hope." People came up to me, sharing how my words had helped them leave toxic marriages, start new lives, or simply forgive themselves. Every story I heard became a thread in a bigger fabric. Proof that pain, when spoken, connects us. One woman in her 70s said, "I thought I was too old to start over. You made me realize I'm not." I smiled. "You're never too old to start over. You're only too afraid to try." Living alone doesn't mean being lonely. It means choosing peace over noise. That truth became the motto of my days. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I joined a community garden, learned to cook new recipes, even began teaching storytelling classes at the local senior center. People often asked, "Don't you ever get lonely, Grace?" I'd smile and say, I was lonelier when I was surrounded by the wrong people. Now, my loneliness had turned into solitude, a place where my soul could rest. One night, as the rain tapped gently on my window, I lit a candle and opened my journal. I wrote a letter, not to my husband, but to the woman I used to be. Dear Grace, you thought the world ended the night you saw them. You thought love had died and life had no meaning. But look at you now, standing tall, smiling freely, writing your truth. You didn't just survive. You bloomed in the ashes. If you ever doubt your worth again, remember this. The silence that once broke you now protects you. With love, Grace. I folded the letter, placed it in a small box, and blew out the candle. The room glowed with soft darkness. I sat there, eyes closed, breathing deeply, at peace with everything I had lost and everything I had found. The world doesn't need you to be perfect, Grace, I told myself. It just needs you to be real. And for the first time in my entire life, I was. There are two kinds of women in this world. Those who break quietly, and those who break open and let the light in. I became the second kind. It's been 3 years since that night. 3 years since I stood in the doorway of betrayal, watching the life I built crumble into dust. And yet here I am, not broken, not bitter, but reborn. The world knows me now, not as Mrs. Howard the wife, but as Grace Howard, the writer who turned heartbreak into hope. My book, The Silence That Spoke Back, had quietly found its way into hearts around the world. It wasn't a bestseller by number, but by meaning. People wrote letters, sent messages, shared stories of courage, inspired by mine. Every word felt like a candle lit in the darkness. One morning, I received an invitation that took my breath away. It was embossed in gold. The Women of Courage Foundation invites Grace Howard to receive the Lifetime Resilience Award for inspiring thousands to rebuild their lives through honesty and self-love. I stared at the letter for a long time. A part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. That the woman who once begged the universe for strength was now being honored for it. The award ceremony was held in San Francisco, a grand hall filled with warm light, soft music, and women whose stories were carved from survival. Helen came with me, holding my arm like proud family. As I stepped onto the stage, the audience rose in applause. I looked out at them, faces of women who had lived, lost, and found themselves again. I saw pain, but I also saw power. I adjusted the microphone, my hands steady. Thank you, I began. This award doesn't belong to just me. It belongs to every woman who ever had to start over. A hush fell over the room. I took a breath and continued. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I had lost the people I loved, the home I built, the version of myself I thought was real. But what I didn't know then was that, sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. I paused. The audience listened like the world had stopped turning. The night I walked away from betrayal, I wasn't strong. I was terrified. But strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about walking forward, even when fear tries to hold your hand. I saw women wiping tears. I smiled softly. I live alone now. I cook for one. I laugh at my own jokes, and I dance to music no one else can hear. People often ask me, "Don't you get lonely?" And I tell them, I was lonelier when I shared a bed with someone who didn't see me. Laughter and nods filled the hall. So here's what I've learned. Peace isn't something you find in another person's arms. It's something you build within your own heart. And once you build it, no one can take it away. The applause was thunderous, but the greatest sound of all was my own voice, steady, certain, free. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She looked barely 30, tears shining in her eyes. "Mrs. Howard," she said, "your story saved me. I was going through something similar. I was ready to give up. Then I read your book. You made me realize it's okay to start again." I held her hands. "You're not starting from nothing," I told her gently. "You're starting from wisdom. That's worth more than anything you lost." She hugged me tightly before walking away. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Healing doesn't end. It ripples, passing from one soul to another, lighting new fires in the dark. That night, after the event, I walked along the bay alone. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the air smelled like rain and freedom. I thought about everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the loneliness, the rediscovery. If someone had told me then that pain could become beauty, I would have laughed. But here I was, living proof that even shattered glass can reflect the sun. I whispered to the wind, "I forgive you. Not for them, for me." Because forgiveness was the last step of letting go, the final key that unlocked the door to peace. A few weeks later, I returned home. My small coastal apartment felt warmer than ever. On the table sat a bouquet of white lilies and a note from Ethan. "Mum, you taught me more about love after your heartbreak than you ever could before it. Thank you for being my example of courage. I love you. Always." I pressed the note to my heart. This was enough. I no longer needed the validation of a husband, a home, or society. I had something better, myself. Every morning now, I wake up to birdsong instead of silence. I brew my coffee, open the window, and let the salt air fill the room. Sometimes I read from my own book, not to remember the pain, but to remind myself how far I've come. She lost everything that wasn't love, and that's how she found peace. I smile at that line every time. My reflection in the mirror has silver hair and gentle wrinkles, but the woman staring back isn't tired. She's radiant. She's free. Maybe life isn't about finding the right person, I wrote in my next journal entry. Maybe it's about becoming the right person for yourself. And that's what I had become. A woman who learned to stand tall in the ruins, to plant flowers where the fire once burned. The world outside changes constantly. People rush, love, betray, and leave. But inside me, there is stillness. And that stillness feels like home. Years ago, my life ended in a single night. Today, I know that night wasn't the end, it was the door. And when I walked through it, barefoot and broken, I found a world waiting just for me. Now I live in a house filled with light, laughter, and quiet strength, built not from bricks, but from truth. I used to think I needed someone to grow old with. I whisper to the morning air. Now I just need to grow old in peace. And as the sun rises over the ocean, painting my walls gold, I close my eyes and smile, because I did it. I lived, I healed, I chose myself, and that was the greatest love story of all. End, Prof.